Well, thank you for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. That sounds like a little too loud. Is that better? All right. Thanks for having me today. I'm primarily going to focus on some of the laws that changed for this year. The one that's probably most interesting to you is electronic prescribing of controlled substances. And hopefully I can provide you with a little bit of clarity on how that's going to work come January 1. So the act I'm speaking of is 17131. It's the governor's bill, an act preventing prescription opioid diversion and abuse. It has a couple major components that may affect pharmacy, and some directly do, and some not so much, but you should have some working awareness of what they are. So electronic prescribing of controlled substances. This actually falls under Section 3 of the Governor's Bill, 21A 249, and is effective January 1st, which is rapidly approaching. It requires that all controlled substance prescriptions be transmitted electronically. The prescriptions that are transmitted electronically need to comply with the federal standards. And all of those records, consistent with the rest of our record keeping, is for a 3-year minimum. And those same records need to be readily retrievable as they are for investigators like my agents at drug control and certain law enforcement at any time. So that electronic prescribing thing is very ominous, right? It's a big cloud that's kind of hanging over healthcare in Connecticut right now. But there's some very important parts of it. There are 5 exemptions that are built into this law for various different reasons. The first exemption is pretty straightforward, probably the most straightforward of them. An electronic transmission is not available due to a temporary technological or electrical failure. And so that can be anything that affects the way the prescriber transmits that prescription. For instance, if your software in your pharmacy is currently not accepting it for whatever reason, the prescriber can use this exemption and write a paper prescription. If the power goes out and they write a paper prescription. If the prescriber's health record goes down for a period of time to do routine maintenance, this is a temporary technological state of failure. So what you're going to see is that these are going to come through from time to time, and you should be aware of them. We are encouraging our prescribers to put some documentation that failure is going on their prescription. Some of the prescribers have the ability to, anytime they print a prescription, to automatically populate that information on the prescription, which will be very helpful for our pharmacists when they receive those prescriptions. The practitioner is required to document the incident in the chart within 72 hours of the chart coming back online. This one's a little more complicated. This exemption is specifically for when a practitioner or prescriber reasonably determines that it would be impractical for the patient to receive an electronically transmitted prescription in a timely manner. There is a restriction of a 5-day supply maximum on this one, and the practitioner has to document the rationale for this. And again, we're also, in our frequently asked questions, which I'll show you, point you to the website a little bit later, we ask the practitioners to put that you're using this exemption on the prescription to help give our pharmacist guidance. There's no mandate that they do that, so you know that, but we are asking them to do that. So when does this one come into play? Well, if it's an emergency room in the middle of the night, the patient isn't in their normal area, and they want to get the prescription, but they don't know which pharmacy they're going to go to right away. They're not maybe going to use their normal pharmacy. I use this example a fair amount. I'm fortunate that my son had his tonsils and adenoids removed and still gets ear infections. But he received a prescription for a liquid hydrocodone-based product. And not every pharmacy is going to have those. Ones that are near the surgery center happen to have it in this particular instance. But that can be an impediment to care. It allows the patient to go find the medication when they need it. There are things like that. Those aren't the only exemptions. They need to be reasonable and they need to be documented in the chart. The rationale for that isn't necessarily the responsibility of the pharmacist. You should just know that perhaps an exemption was used. Prescription is to be dispensed by a pharmacy located outside the state. So there's nothing, I can't, and nor would I want to necessarily mandate that some other state accepts electronic prescription. That's their choice. We also have a hard time when any of our laws restrict interstate commerce that can be problematic. The idea is if that state doesn't accept an electronic prescription, the practitioner has this ability to print a prescription for that reason. But this also has its own challenges. So let's say that patient was going to out of state. Let's say you live in Fairfield County, and they were going to go out of state originally, and then their plans changed, and they come to your pharmacy with this medication. The pharmacist can make a decision to fill that prescription based on their professional judgment. But it would be very important to make sure you document your rationale for doing that. And if you start to notice that all of a sudden all these patients keep coming in with the same use of this same exemption, you start to, the antenna goes up, right? We all know that feeling when we see a prescription, it makes us uncomfortable. The hair goes up on the back of our neck. The story doesn't make sense, right? Use those things to your advantage in these situations. But the intention of this law, whole questions to the end. The intention of this law is not to inhibit care. And so when you start to think about these things as you go forward, it's very important to document that, whether it's in your electronic file or on the prescription itself. So use of the electronic prescribing of controlled substances can actually negatively impact care. So this one is a little bit odd, but I think as I explain it, it'll make a little bit more sense. These transmissions have limited characters and limited field availability. Certain prescriptions may not be suitable for transmission in this system. It's not Twitter with just 140 characters, but we're talking about multiple products, compounded medication, parenteral IV, intramuscular, which may have complicated instructions, longer complicated directions. As we talk about this opioid epidemic and the things that we're seeing, and we think is a prescription drug epidemic as well, more physicians are getting comfortable with long directions that actually slowly taper doses off. And so we want to make sure that our prescribers can appropriately communicate with their patients through our labels. So if those things can't be done in an electronic format, a paper prescription may apply. And oral prescriptions are still permitted. This one specifically talks about this. But when you talk about an oral prescription, a doctor could still, in theory, call in a C3 through 5 prescription and a C2. And actually, it addresses that in the law as well. And technically, they could use the reasonably determined that it's not good for patient care clause for refills on 3 drugs. The big exemption that we have is the exemption that demonstrates to the Commissioner of Consumer Protection, ultimately through my department, or my division, that the prescriber does not have the capacity to electronically transmit prescriptions. This is a big one. It's a complicated one because now a physician needs to have a waiver with us. And how do you know about that? What's your responsibilities around that? The lack of capacity. In the lack of capacity, we've published a questionnaire. It's 4 very challenging questions. First one is, where do you practice? What's your setting? The second one is, do you have a computer where you practice? The third question is, do you currently have software that's capable of complying with the DEA to transmit electronic prescriptions? And the fourth question is, are you requesting a waiver? And so those very simple questions are tied to their controlled substance registration, which is managed by the Department of Consumer Protection. It's kind of like an in-between between the DEA license and the medical license. So we don't screen for all of our prescribers all of the different reasons that they can have exemptions. All of the exemptions, if they don't have meet any of those criteria, they can get the exemption. The challenge is that many of our physicians, or prescribers rather, practice in multiple locations. And those multiple locations may not all have capacity. When they do have the capacity, they are mandated to use the electronic prescribing. When they don't, they can file for the exemption. But the exemption is not necessarily site-specific on our website. So if they have the exemption and you were to see it on our website, it could apply at almost any time. The pharmacist isn't always going to know which practice site exactly the practitioner is practicing from at that particular location. We barely know now. But to understand, if you see an exemption on the website, I would encourage you to document that you checked it out at a point in time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. So for the pharmacist, when they receive, first of all, the pharmacies are required to accept these prescriptions electronic. Your software fails, your software fails. We also, when I talk to the prescribers about this, I encourage them to let the pharmacy know if they are having a failure transmitting prescriptions to you, so that you guys can become aware of that and help your vendor correct the problem. Just like the rest of our record-keeping requirements, it's a 3-year requirement. They have to be readily retrievable. The DEA does not necessarily permit you to print them. If you do choose to print them, you still are mandated to file them chronologically and sequentially. So, how does a pharmacist find out if a prescriber has this waiver? There's 2 separate ways on our website, and there are instructions on our website for it. The way that's currently available right now is admittedly a bit clunky. It's the same way you would validate a technician registration or your own pharmacist license, but it's under the controlled substance registration for that practitioner. And I have some screenshots, but they're going to be far from you to see. The other thing that we're going to do, and actively working on, depending on how well this goes in the next few weeks, we may have a spreadsheet that refreshes every 24 hours with a list of all the prescribers that have successfully applied for the waiver. If I'm unable to achieve that come January, well, actually probably December 31st, I don't know what the days of the week, I'm not really good at dates, right before the new year, I'm going to manually publish a PDF document that is going to be searchable for you, so you can look up a doctor that way as well. I'm really hoping for this regular update, so I'm not spending every day running this report and publishing it for you all. I want to make it as smooth for you as possible. Here's our website. It's really easy to remember. There's a shortcut to that. If you want to write it down, I'll give it to you now. It's ct.gov/DCP/DCD. It's Drug Control Division. ct.gov/DCP, Department of Consumer Protection, /DCD, like Drug Control Division. And there's a new link right up at the top about electronic prescribing of controlled substances. We have a frequently asked questions document there that is continually evolving. And so I encourage you to check back on that from time to time. At the bottom of that page, it actually tells you when it was last updated. I have 3 new questions in the hopper that I'm working on and making sure that my legal staff is okay with what I'm saying. So in November, we sent 28,000 emails to the different controlled substance registrations that we have in the state to give them information about the electronic prescribing of controlled substances, followed by their password so that they could log into our system and complete it. We came back in on that Monday, did that on a Friday night and Saturday, because I didn't want to jam up the rest of our system with 20,000 emails. Next day, our inbox immediately started to flood. And so we've been digging out ever since. I think we've received over 800 emails about it. We've had, as of Monday, 3,700 waivers completed. The interesting part is that in the email, we've requested that, we've told the prescribers that they only need to complete the waiver if they're looking for a waiver. But 830 of those prescribers actually answered no, that they were not seeking the waiver. So I'm not sure if they didn't read the email or didn't read the question at the end, so we're going to have to figure that out soon. So if you have a conversation with a practitioner and they filled it out wrong, have them contact our department. Email is the best way for us. We can definitely deal with more emails than we can deal with phone calls. And so people always ask me why. Why is this important? This is important because just in 2016, this 19-year-old kid got his hands on a couple of prescription blanks from a prescriber's office and was arrested. This is important because Brian Page and Super Dave Thompson, as he's known, got 80,000 tablets of oxycodone that we know of, using 800 fraudulent prescriptions and 270 different patient names. Very elaborate schemes. Many of these schemes actually targeted Medicaid. And this guy, if you talk to my friends at DEA, in Connecticut, he's what they call their original gangster of prescription drug fraud. He was doing this 16,000 tablets. He would actually drive from Bedford Hills, New York, all the way to the casino, and had an intricate methodology from start to finish, and then go back and get prescriptions all across the state. This is why this is important. It affects our Medicaid, affects our prescriptions. It has some benefits for the patient when it works appropriately, and then hopefully these emerging prescriptions and prescriptions of need can get to our pharmacies quicker so you can fill them and maybe have a better interaction with the patient so they're not waiting for you all the time. But it doesn't come without challenges. Here's some statistics, and I do apologize, the slides are different than what we did before. We felt that this may be better for the recording. But if you look, I've been watching some of the statistics through ShareScripts about electronic prescribing in our state, and we are behind in electronic prescribing across the country. Only 3.7 of our active e-prescribers have electronic prescribing capability. As of December of last year, we're up to 6.9% as of September. Our pharmacies are pretty good about being ready, but not all of us are ready. And I don't know how ShareScripts grabs these numbers. We have some 714 pharmacies in our state currently. And when you look at it, we have 28,000 registrations for controlled substance registration, but some of those are site specific and some of them are duplicate. So here are the slides that are probably really easy for you to see in the back. So when you go into our website, you don't do that. You go to look up a license, it's toward the bottom of the screen. You can either type in the registration number, but who here before today has heard of the controlled substance registration? 5 people, awesome. It's a registration we've had for a long time in our state. Like I said, it's a pseudo. It's the precursor to the DEA. We're one of the few states that actually do that. Search usually by first name and last names. Sometimes in our search, less is more. You got to make sure you select the controlled substance registration certificate. So what you'll see here is you get this screen here, which is number 5. Click Details. You click View Profile. If this number 6 View Profile does not exist, it means no waiver was completed. I can't tell you how many prescribers have called us saying, I completed the waiver, but I don't see it. Well, that's probably because they didn't click Publish and Save. So once you click View Profile, you see our very, very challenging questions. And then what you'll see is the thing that you would need to focus on as a pharmacist is what the answer is to question number 4. And if they're asking for the waiver and it says yes, then they have a waiver. If you do go to this step and go this far to look, and I would encourage you to document that or print it, whatever your choice is, and the date that you did it. If the answer is no or blank, that means there's no waiver on file. So what does a pharmacist do when they get a paper prescription, right? There is no law that says that you have to validate every one. But the law does say that you have to make sure a prescription is valid. It's important to make sure that whatever you choose to do in those situations when you get a prescription, especially a written one, that you document. It's the first thing you heard in pharmacy school. You hear it all the time. We don't document anything. It didn't happen. I really hope that if you guys get in a situation with a paper prescription and do choose to look this prescriber up, that you do document it, because it's really not something that we want to have to do a lot of enforcement on. We want this to be a successful program, and we understand that it's going to be challenging, especially January 2nd. I'm having extra staff in my office on January 2nd to make sure that we can answer phone calls for y'all as they go. Again, I know that you may not all have great access to email in your pharmacy. Email is definitely a preferred method of communication. As you can imagine, January 2nd, we're going to get bombed with phone calls. And if you've seen the state budget lately, it doesn't look like I have any extra help coming. So that being said, I really encourage you to pay attention to our frequently asked questions. I continue to address them regularly. But you may choose to have your tech go and find our exemptions for prescribers that you see regularly in your practice. Your techs can do that on your behalf. There's nothing that limits that. The next document is a document that actually specifically has a carve-out for pharmacists, and it's the Voluntary Non-Opioid Directive. So this directive is filed by a patient with their practitioner, their prescriber, and indicates that to the prescriber that they specifically do not want to receive any treatment with opioid medication. There are, it's a document that's published on the Department of Public Health website, and it can be revoked either orally or on the form itself at any time. Basically, and it can be electronically, sorry. So it specifically says that the pharmacist shall not be held in violation for filling a prescription if they know that it's in place. But if you do see this form, it does come into your pharmacy for whatever reason, well, I would encourage you to at least have a conversation with the patient about it. Ask if they've had it revoked from the physician. Ask them if you'd like to call them the physician about it to make sure, or prescriber, or whoever it may be. But it does specifically have an exclusion for pharmacists on it. Actually, again, nice big print there. This red box talks about the pharmacist's responsibility there. Well, obviously there are concerns about these kind of forms. What happens in an emergency situation? What happens if you don't know? If a prescriber doesn't know? And it does talk about some of those things on the form specifically. If the prescriber does not know about the form at all, and they treat within the normal standard of care, in most cases they're going to be okay. But there also is a provision for emergencies on that. So the form is available on the Department of Public Health website. I don't know how much of you go there. It's kind of like the DCP website, ct.gov/DPH, Department of Public Health. If you search VNOD, you'll find this document. There's nothing that mandates that the prescriber present this form to the patient either. So the patient would most likely have to go find it somewhere. The prescriber may have a conversation about it. But it'll be interesting to see how much update this gets and how much you all see it in your pharmacies at all, if at all. So Public Act 17-131 also addressed opioid prescribing restrictions. And I don't know if you guys remember, but last year's bill had opioid prescribing restrictions as well. This modified the restrictions slightly. The first restriction remains, for the most part, unchanged. New issued prescription for an outpatient use of an opioid can't be more than 7 days supply. The minor had a change. It went from 7 days to 5 days. It's interesting that it doesn't really discuss whether it's a first-time opioid or not in this part of the law. But that is a change there. But it's really important for pharmacists to understand that there's a big overarching caveat to this entire thing. The doctor or prescriber has professional discretion. So they can choose to prescribe above the 7 or 5 day limit. For instance, I had a conversation, again, I don't know why I'm so stuck on tonsils and adenoids, but the issue seems to follow me around a little bit. A surgeon tells me that tonsils and adenoids generally require 7-day supply of medication. Some pharmacists are refusing to fill it for greater than 5 days. But they know that that's going to be the case, and they don't want the patient to be out of medication on a weekend. So my direction to the prescriber in this case was, have that conversation with the pharmacist, explain it to him, and maybe document it on the prescription when you send it. Professional discretion is important. I think this is a great point for pharmacists to have an interaction with the prescriber that can be positive in nature, where you say, hey, look, there is this law that does this. I want to make sure that, we're doing everything right by the patient on our end and that I'm compliant with the law. And I just wanted to make sure you're aware of it. Are you prescribing this for some reason? Again, those reasons can be documented on the back of the prescription. It doesn't need to be elaborate, but having that conversation and documenting that a conversation occurred can be very important for the way that prescription gets looked at down the road, whether it be an investigation that's based on the prescriber's behavior or the pharmacy's. And so in those scenarios, when they do prescribe outside of the limitations of this law, they are required to document the condition in the chart. They're not required to put it on the prescription at this time. So the big change to this law was the educational component. And this is another area where pharmacists could also take advantage of interacting with their patients in a different way. The law requires that the prescriber go over really 4 points with the patient. The risks of overdose and addiction, dangers of taking opioid drugs with alcohol, benzodiazepines, and other CNS depressants, the reasons the prescription is necessary, and if applicable, these conversations need to go on with any custodial parent or person that's with a minor patient at that time. So the education wasn't required for the adults in the first time this law was passed. They've altered that now so that everyone gets the education. That's a really important part. I mean, we need to make sure that our patients are getting educated about the risks of these medications. And if they haven't heard about what these medications are currently doing in Connecticut and across our country, at least maybe we have another opportunity to educate them here. Because, yes, they're very valuable, important medications in the way we treat our patients in this state and across our country. But they don't come without risks, just like any other medication. We need to make sure that we're providing our patients with appropriate information so they can make decisions for their care as best as they can. Well, another part of our educational component is the opioid fact sheet. This fact sheet was developed by the Alcohol and Drug Policy Council. It's a one-page document that has to have at least 12.5. And its document is designed to give the risks of taking opioids, the symptoms of opioid use disorder, and services that are available. This form is on the DEMAS website, and odds are we're going to put it on our website at some point soon. Unfortunately, I'm in one of those website migration periods. Our 20-year-old portal is now getting refreshed finally, and hopefully it can allow us to bring better information to you all through it. But I'm not going to put it on the website and I have to recreate it in a month. And so it's going to go there at some point, probably under the pharmacist tab, so that you can bring this to your patients when they get these opioid prescriptions. Now, I personally think that pharmacists have a major role here in helping patients with opioid prescriptions because we have all this information in front of us. Some information that the physicians don't even see, although they should see with the prescription monitoring program. You can have this interaction with them. It may be different. Providing information at these points in times can be very, very helpful. You combine that with the naloxone prescribing and the CDC guidelines. Pharmacists have a lot of opportunity here to appropriately affect patient care in probably the ways that you intended to when you went to school. So here's what it looks like. Again, not easy to see on the slide, but it's a 2-pager, and it's all part of an ad campaign that's generated out of a couple of grants with the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and the Food and Drug Administration, and SAMHSA, not FDA. Sorry. that we're working on with PMP enhancements as well as educational outreach. Standing order for naloxone. So I think we all know that naloxone is a very important drug for us in our country in the fight of the opioid epidemic. It has the ability to save lives, and access is a major issue. Fortunately, we're up to over almost 600 pharmacies in the state that have at least one pharmacist that can prescribe naloxone in it. And we have trained almost 2,000 pharmacists in our state. And so I'm very proud of those numbers, and I'm proud of the way that I can report back to the government and in the legislature that our pharmacists have taken this seriously. But they're always concerned about access. And for those pharmacists that choose not to get this certification and don't want to prescribe on their own, they have this option for the standing order, which is an option where they have an agreement with a prescribing practitioner, a more traditional prescribing practitioner like a doctor, and they have to have a protocol for how they're going to handle it, and every prescription that's given out under this protocol has to be transmitted back to the prescriber so they have a record of what's going on. And it's just another mechanism for us to get naloxone out to patients that need it. The other thing that's really important about naloxone is if you identify a patient that has one of these CDC guideline criteria and you choose to prescribe naloxone to them, training the patient that's at your store is nice, but you also should probably have a family member or caregiver with them that you're training as well. Because most people that overdose aren't going to be able to administer naloxone to themselves. And so it's really important that their loved one or someone that's close to them have the education as well. And there's nothing that stops you from prescribing it to them in our law. And so it's really, again, it's another one of those points where a pharmacist has this ability to kind of get out of the day-to-day that we're doing and maybe hopefully make a really good impact on a patient. And don't forget that there's a number of patients in our state and across the country that may just be decompensating on their current dose of opioids because they're getting older, because their disease is progressing, because something else changes in their life. And so there's a number of people, or they get confused and they take an extra dose of medication. So it's important that when you have conversations with people about this, that you try to prevent stigma from being put onto them about why you are offering this to them, so that you can break down that barrier and explain to them that your intention is to save them if they need it. So the next few things I really want to tell you about are some quick things. All of you that have emails on file with our department should have received your renewal information in the last week or so. And so you know, as a general rule, we don't send your password and username in the same email. And so we will send multiple emails, or we request that you request it from us, and we'll transmit it to the email address on file. Also understand that when you log into your account, you can change your username and your password to whatever you like. We've pre-filled your username and password historically because it was not, those functionalities did not always exist. The other big change now is that you will no longer be printing certificates for your registration. You'll be getting a PDF when your registration gets approved to be sent to your email address as well. Obviously, you want to keep that email. You'll also be able to go back into our website and reprint it at any time, but you still should post it in your pharmacy. And I think you may have noticed in the last few years, we've actually taken your address off of the credential altogether. So when you do post it in your place of employment, your address is not there. Our brand new feature, I just got an email on this last week, is you can actually change your own address online too. That should help you comply with the 5-day thing. I know the pharmacist license address is probably the last thing you think about when you have an address change. It is important that you change that so that we can communicate with you. But right now, obviously, with the finances the way they are and efficiency, it's the easiest way for us to communicate with you is through email. And that's why you should update it regularly. And you can update it through that login process as well. This is the email address that you should direct prescribers to if they have questions about electronic prescribing or the waiver, or that you should use if you have general routine questions. We have a bunch of different email addresses for your pharmacist license that are specific. You can still use this. We'll route them through our division. We try to keep them separate so that timely information can get transmitted back to you and we can kind of pre-screen them. The drug control division consists of approximately four business units, really. It's the prescription monitoring and reporting system, medical marijuana program, drug control agents for its inspection and enforcement arm, and the commission of pharmacy. And so we deal with basically, when you can include medical marijuana patient registrations, 150,000 registrations the unit is responsible for. There's like 26 people. So I say that to give you some context and ask you to be patient with us. We do get back to our emails very quickly, and if you do need to speak with us, again, be patient. We will call you back, and if you can't wait on hold for a long time, send an email and ask us to call you back. So now I'll open the floor to questions. There was one back here I asked to hold off. What was it? Oh, go ahead. Time. In regard to what? Like knowing what it is? Right. So the question is how ready are the hospitals to do e-prescribing? All of our hospitals have been working very hard to get compliant. They have a lot of responsibility in order to be compliant with DEA, both financially and through their process. Many of our hospitals are in the process. I know some of our bigger institutions are about 85% there. So I think by July of next year, we'll have a pretty good chunk of our hospital systems engaged. That's what they're telling me right now. And so I think one is actually ready to go January 1st. One is going to be 85% on January 1st, and everyone else is in some state of process. I'm saying that may be good practice for you. Oh, you can take the exemption over the phone if they said that they were using it for patient need, right? So if you got any prescription and you called the prescriber and you said, hey, I don't see you on the exemption list. What's going on? Yeah, absolutely. You can take a verbal exemption for anything. You can also take a stamped exemption. So like if they decide to use a stamp for each one of their exemption types, you can do that. In that particular instance, it's important to document the things that you did to do that. Even if they filled out the questionnaire wrong, I wouldn't want you to inhibit patient care for that purpose. So if it's in the best interest of the patient and you believe the prescription to be valid, I would encourage you to use your professional discretion in filling that prescription. Go ahead. No. So the question is do you have to call? And the answer is no. The law does not specifically say that that you have to check on everyone. You know, there's going to be an uptick in this law as it gets adopted and accepted into the general kind of practice in the general way of life as for a pharmacist and a prescriber in our state. And so, and I can't tell you to not check. So I would encourage you to use your professional judgment and document whatever your rationale is, because ultimately that rationale is going to get judged by a board of your peers. So if you do what a reasonable and proven pharmacist does in those cases, what you believe a reasonable and proven pharmacist would do in the situation that's in front of you, and most of the time you're going to be fine. The question becomes is, do you do that every single time? Do you never ever check? Right? Have you done no extra work to make this look like you're making an effort? Those are the questions you should ask yourself.
Right. So the IT issue with the institutions, because most of it's IT issues to get compliant with it. And as you described, July looks like the day that many of them will become compliant. Are the 30, I assume that's number 5 on your exemption list. Yep. It fits under number 5. And you said there was 3,800 physicians that already have waivers. Are many of those physicians part of those institutions?
It's hard for me to say.
Okay, because
we don't. So the question is, are the people that have registered for the exemption already, the 3,800 people minus the 800 that don't really have an exemption currently, depending on what their answer really is. Where are they coming from? I know a large number of my current exemptions are from dental practices, who generally write few prescriptions for controlled substances, and veterinarians have been very interested in the exemptions. We're encouraging anyone that has any concern about being close to this deadline and unable to comply to file for the exemption as soon as possible.
That's on an individual basis, not on a system basis.
Right. So the law is the responsibility of the individual controlled substance registration holder.
You mentioned before, and you might have answered it already, about a Lortab liquid prescription. It gets prescribed to a pharmacy. He doesn't have it. What happens to that prescription?
That's a very interesting scenario right now. So the question is what happens when a prescription is electronically transmitted to a pharmacy and the pharmacy doesn't have it? Technically, our law does not permit transfer of a Schedule II controlled substance, no matter what form it comes in. The National Association of Chain Drug Stores has posed this very question to the Drug Enforcement Administration and received communication back from the Drug Enforcement Administration. We are currently seeking clarification on that because we can't necessarily use the communication between that individual as the policy or the state. We are looking at possibly in some enabling legislation to allow the transfer of unfilled electronic prescriptions of controlled substances in our state. Currently, is not permissible. Technically, you can't even transfer an unfilled C3 through 5 of any format per DEA. And so we're working very hard to get some guidance out there. We're going to update that on our website as soon as we have a clearer picture of that from DEA, because if we can rely on what their guidance is and they can provide more of a public guidance, not just directed towards an individual, we'll be able to do that and allow for this to go on. I know it's not a great answer today, but we are going to look to change the law as well to allow for some of that to occur in our law, just for electronic prescriptions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have just a couple of things. You indicated, because we knew that it was going to start January 1st for electronic prescribing of controlled substances. So the practitioner would have received this exemption in the mail or not?
So the question is how has the prescriber received any kind of communication? The prescriber should have received an email. And keep in mind, we sent 28,000 emails in one shot. My software doesn't always manage that. Great. And so there's some people that certainly fell through the cracks. And we've dealt with a bunch of that already. So if they have not heard about this and you have a conversation with them, encourage them to send us an email to that email address, because we will help them get on board with that as quickly as possible. We have a lot of instruction pages on our page to help our practitioners get through it. The biggest problem they have usually is username and password.
Right. And so since he's a dentist and he is maybe 4 or 5 times a year, he'll write 3 or 4 Tylenol.
Dentists love this question. So there's an exemption for that. So the question is if the prescriber only writes prescriptions 3 to 5 times a year, if that, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. There's no number restriction. If they don't have the technology to do it, they are not mandated to do it. They have to file for the exemption. But you can't keep asking for dentists. We got pharmacists here that have questions.
One of the questions from MJ, who pays for the software to file for this?
The question is who pays for the software?
Right.
The practitioner. The healthcare institution, the pharmacy that's enabled it, all of those. Some get better reimbursement actually because they've transmitted electronically from Medicaid or Medicare. I'm not. Don't quote me on that. That's not my business. I don't do the money. Go ahead.
You might have mentioned the issues that you have an exemption for C 3 and 5. Can they still do verbal?
Yeah, so a verbal can still be done. It may fall under the patient need exemption. But if they have the general exemption, yeah, it can still work. Yes.
So it means that the controlled general also apply to
All controlled substances, C2, C5. Go ahead. Ms. Carno. So the question is how confident are we that our practitioners or prescribers know about this? About as confident as I am that the pharmacists all know about it. I can tell you that I've been doing a lot of public speaking across the state about this particular issue to pharmacists and doctors. I've engaged with the Hospital Association and the Medical Society, as well as the pediatrics and dentists. I spoke to 350 dentists the other day. It was about as painful as going to them. And so, I work really hard to get the information out there, but I can't knock on everyone's door. Just yesterday, I did a talk for the Fairfield County Medical Society, and then in the evening, I did a talk for the scope of pain and brought it up there as well. 28,000 emails. It's been on the books since July, and it was negotiated from February forward. Not everything is ever going to penetrate everyone. And that's why if you start to hear these things from prescribers, it's always good to drop on it and throw it back at us, and we'll deal the best we can with it to help get them and continue to educate them. It's never easy to get something like this out to the masses, but that shouldn't be a reason to stop it, because I think it has a lot of value across our state for various reasons. But
sort of diving into that, using PMP to determine whether or not somebody is a first-time prescription. The hospitals aren't on PMP, right? So they don't really have any way other than talking to the hospital to find out if this was a continuation from treatment they've currently been on. So
the question is about continuation of treatment on the 7-day. rule and what, what happens in a hospital. So generally, the prescription monitoring program does not have reported administered medication. And so, correct, there's no way to necessarily know that. You can interview the patient, you can call the facility to make that determination, and do the best you can to do that, understanding that there's an overarching responsibility for the prescriber to bear that responsibility in a large way. They have the responsibility. Nothing that statute is silent on what pharmacist's responsibility is, but I think it would be good professional judgment to ask about it. It's your job to determine what your level of comfort with is. I mean, do they have the wristband on? Do they tell you what happened to them? That may be enough to help you kind of get comfortable with it. But that's a professional comfort level that each one of you may have a slight different variation.
The prescriber can also decide to override that.
Right. Yeah. So the professional judgment allows for any override anyway. And so even if you found out that they didn't have it there, they still can override it. Right. Let me go one at a time so I can announce them now. Does the waiver expire? No, not yet. The only way that would come into play is if there was a law change. We are going to ask that they refresh it on their renewals. So they renew every 2 years, like our pharmacist license. So we're going to re-ask the questions again. And unless there's some other law change in the meantime, we're not going to plan on changing that. They also can update it at any time. So this is a kind of a living document, so they can change it tomorrow if all of their software gets compliant across all of the systems they practice. Question number 2. The question is, how often are you expected to recheck the list? Basically, right?
Yes, is it okay? That we proactive, look at your person now.
Unless you're open January 1. So I think the real nuts and bolts of that is that once they have the waiver, even if they have the waiver and they have the capability, nothing stops them from prescribing my term. It's always important to remember that part. So if any one of their practice sites becomes compliant, the waiver may still be there for some of the other sites they work on. For instance, psychiatry, a lot of psychiatry practices, they don't even use electronic record. Sometimes because their patients don't want to use electronic record. And so, but they may jump into a bigger healthcare system at some point where they have it. But it's important to understand that yes, it may change a little bit. But once the waiver is there, it's kind of can always be there per se. And then I think that if you refresh it every so often, based on maybe an experience or something you saw, it's within the normal course of your business and what you see. There's no hard, fast rule. I think it's really important to kind of take a look at what you're seeing and kind of adjust to that. And as always, do the best you can and document what you can.
One more.
On that, 3? Okay. So are you combining the 7-day and the electronic? Mine is on the if it's fraudulent. You have a corresponding responsibility for prescriptions that you feel are okay. So if you felt that that was an inappropriate prescription, toenail, ingrown toenail, getting a 7-day or more supply of an opioid, I don't know how you would necessarily justify in front of your peers that that was an appropriate prescription. You have the right to refuse treatment. I also make sure you understand you should exercise that power very judiciously. Not because you didn't like the way they looked, or they were mean to you, or gave you a hard time on this particular day, but use it because it's a clinically significant rationale.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but maybe let me poke them a little. I know what's going to happen when you get an electronic prescription, you don't have the drug. Does it make sense, if you're lucky enough to get a hold of the prescriber, to print out the original prescription, file it as not filled, and have him prescribe another one?
Yeah, I mean, so the question is in the scenario where you get a prescription that you cannot fill because you don't have quantity in stock right now, you should definitely contact the prescriber to let them know and let them retransmit that prescription elsewhere, and you should make an effort to cancel the prescription you received in some way, shape, or form so it does not get mistakenly filled. And most of those cases are going to have a situation where the insurance is not going to pay for it because it was paid for a few days later, but you never want my staff coming into you saying, why did you fill this? When you knew you didn't have it and you waited till later. Right, but you knew the prescriber was going to go and send that prescription elsewhere.
Yeah, but he can send you an alternate, can't he?
Sure.
Well, that's what, okay.
Sorry, a few seconds to read the question about the program code. So if you call the provider and say, oh, we're billing for something that might be in a manner, I think maximum 5 days supply. But the previous one was 7. So this was 5 days supply more than the provider.
Oh, no, so the timely manner is a 5-day supply restriction. And that's clear. It doesn't really, the only way it affects those other ones is that it's the stricter of the two. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, if they're pursuing a waiver, especially early on in the process, you call a prescriber, you get a paper prescription, you call them, you say, hey, what's going on with this? It's supposed to be, which waiver, which exemption are you using? And they're like, what's an exemption? Sure. Right, so they say, well, what's an exemption? And you say, oh, so there's this law that requires electronic, da, 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 da. Oh, I need to pursue a waiver. Document on it. Yeah, and I encourage you to keep this email address handy just for that purpose. I mean, it's useful for so many things. So you give it to them. You not necessarily need to chase them down. You don't need to follow them through the whole process. You say, hey, email this. Of course, it's going to happen at some off time when we're not around, right? 5:30 on a Friday night. These are going to run into these problems. Right. I mean, those things are going to exist. Hey, make sure that prescription was intended to be legitimate. Go ahead. Yep. So the do not fill before date. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So because what may happen is they may send you all 3 on the one day. There's nothing that would stop you from putting that kind of on hold or keeping it in your system. The most important part is you follow their instructions and not to fill it before that day. I don't know how your software is going to handle those types of issues necessarily. But I'm interested to see how the physicians or the prescribers are going to choose to handle that. So are they going to just issue it each 30 days or so, or are they going to still go with the multiple issue? I think that's yet to be determined because there's no real guidance on it. It really comes down to a preference of that prescriber. But so the question is, what about the ADD or ADHD medications that have the do not fill before date? If they have the waiver, you can continue to honor the paper prescriptions, and then that's fine. And like I said, with the electronic, they may send all three and have do not fill before on each three. And there's nothing that necessarily stops that. But I'm going to look harder at the DEA guidance on that to see if there's anything specific about EPCS and if there's a good reason. I'll put that up on the website to help clarity. Go ahead, Lori. If they're waived, or one of the other exemptions, yeah, or skilled nursing, chronic convalescent nursing homes, but hospice, yes, many of the hospice are going to get waived from my conversations with them because they jump around so much. They're not always, not all their software is kind of mobile capable yet. Getting there. Oh, this is my last question. I'm being told so. Yeah, I mean, you can ask, well, so it depends on which kind of waiver. Right? So if it's the full exemption waiver, the big number 5 waiver, you can back that up on our website if you so choose. But there's nothing stopping that from coming from them. I mean, because they're not mandated to necessarily tell you what waiver they have, so you can take it from anyone in their office. Like I said, we are encouraging them to communicate with you on the prescription. And a lot of the software sites, if you click print, it forces them to choose the rationale for the waiver, which is great. I mean, those are the things that you kind of hope for, but I don't think we're there yet across our entire health system. But hopefully that will come soon. So I don't see any reason why a medical assistant or office staff member could provide you with a waiver. You may not want to feed them the information. Are you using this particular waiver for this particular patient? You may want to ask the open-ended question like you would anywhere else. Yeah, and like I said, just so you remember, text can look up the waivers for you and help you with that process. Okay. Thanks.